Thanks for listening to the ArtTactic Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Green. It was great seeing so many of you in New York last week for the start of the fall season, especially at the Armory Show. Like many, I had mixed feelings about the fair this year. On the one hand, there was good energy. It was nice to catch up with so many galleries, collectors, and even artists after the quiet months of July and August, but the art itself on view felt a bit uneven. Perhaps the most memorable area of the fair was the Present section, which highlights younger galleries that are less than, I believe, 10 years old. It featured some really exciting presentations, mostly solo booths, and a lot of the artists were actually there at the fair, so you got to meet them and talk to them about their work while you were inside their respective booths. But while you're walking around the fair, it was hard not to notice the galleries that weren't there. Most of the blue-chip galleries chose to do Free Soul instead, which takes place the same week, and others opted to skip the fairs altogether. For the New York galleries, they probably figured, hey, we're only 10 or 20 minutes away from the convention center anyways, let's get collectors to come to our actual space and see our show. One of the galleries at the fair that I thought did have a really fantastic presentation was Alexander Berggruen, who had a solo booth of new paintings by Freya Morris Douglas. Alexander Berggruen is about to celebrate its 5th anniversary, so we invited Alex on the show to talk about what the first 5 years have been like, along with other insights into the art world. Hope you enjoy the conversation. Thanks so much for listening. Alex, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, first, I want to say congratulations on the gallery's upcoming 5th year anniversary. I remember when you opened in 2019. It's really remarkable. It's really flown by.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it really has. It's been a whirlwind.
Well, I think maybe to an outsider, 5 years may not seem like a big number, but starting a gallery, having it not only be sustainable, but to have it in a thriving position, I think it's incredibly impressive. So as you reflect now on these first 5 years, what are some of the most important things you've learned about successfully running a gallery?
Thank you. Yeah, it really has been an amazing learning experience for me. I started the gallery in October of 2019, and we had 3 exhibitions, and we had the 4th one hanging in the gallery and ready to be shown to our audience. And then COVID hit. So it was a really interesting starting point. And I'm sure there are a few other galleries, peers of mine here in New York, but elsewhere too, that started around a similar timeline and had that initial challenge of trying to adapt and figure out how best to work with our artists, work with our audience, to, handle the situation of lockdown and hopefully emerge even stronger. And I'm really thankful that I think we were able to do that. You asked a great question about what I've learned through these 5 years. And I have, thankfully, I've had some time to reflect on it, especially this past summer. We're about to hit the 5-year mark this October. And I think to me, the most important thing I've learned is that because my gallery is especially focused on primary market, it's been such a terrific opportunity to work directly with contemporary artists. And to me, my goal always is to have the gallery exist as an artist-centric gallery. It's the idea is really to empower the artists, bring the vision an artist has from their studio to life as it is presented most often for the first time to our audience. And, to me, I think about most solo shows take at least a year to prepare. So a big lesson for me is always planning ahead and being as early as we can and making plans for a year and a half, or even 2 years out with certain artists to give them that time to work in the studio, make the strongest work possible, maybe even edit a bit and not necessarily have to feel like everything they make needs to leave the studio on a time crunch. But instead, they can experiment, make strange paintings, make paintings that don't always succeed, as I think, is the most fruitful and rewarding process for a lot of artists. And then, yeah, really to hopefully reward and highlight all of that time that they've put into the work in the studio in the best possible way when we present their work. It's been hidden for about a year in a lot of cases, in a very private, insular process for a lot of artists. And of course, artists have studio visits here and there, and bring collectors and museum curators and other galleries in to see work in progress. But for a lot of our audience, it's really seeing it for the first time in our gallery. And my hope is that we always honor the artist's working process and put our best forward to help share their vision with our world.
I think those are really great answers. And following up on that, your parents have run a gallery in San Francisco for many years, Berggruen Gallery. And as a result, you grew up in the art world and in that gallery environment. I think something our listeners, and myself included, really enjoy hearing about is the art world of the past and just how different it was compared to today. So how different was the art world then, and how do you think the experience of growing up in that environment actually helps you run your gallery more effectively today?
Thank you. Yeah, another great question. It was really lucky for me to be able to grow up around my parents and seeing them have a gallery in San Francisco, which is not necessarily the biggest art town, but really does have a reach toward a lot of, especially West Coast-based collectors, museums. It was an amazing, lucky childhood experience. I would grow up going to openings they would have artists staying with us at the house often. I had the very fortunate experience of learning how to weld from Mark de Souvero when I was, probably 8 or 9. And
Wow.
yeah, thankfully in a safe way. And
I guess as safe as welding can be for an 8-year-old.
for an 8-year-old, welding, exactly. But to me, it was just a really lucky, fortunate thing. And I didn't ever take it for granted, but maybe I also didn't fully realize that I was learning a lot from my mom and my dad. They worked very closely together, at the gallery for many, many years. Sadly, my mom passed in 2020, and she still, a lot of lessons that I have learned from her still ring very true. And I think of her often. My dad is still running the gallery today, and I think he's made it past the 50-year mark of his gallery. I think it's 54 years probably this year.
Wow.
So it's just been amazing to see through so many decades how their gallery has evolved. And yeah, you asked a great question of how the art gallery environment has changed from even my childhood till now. And I think a lot of it has to do with technology, transparency, the growth of art fairs, how museum relationships with galleries operate. The list goes on. But to me, my hope is to bring my own gallery into the 21st century in a way that recognizes some of those technological changes and advances in many cases, but honoring, I think the core tenets of how my parents really have built a great reputation and working process with their artists, with their collectors. They do a lot of secondary market business as well, and that's been a part of my gallery to some degree too. I think so much of the art business is really built upon reputation and doing one's best to provide a very honest, true, helpful, and welcoming experience for the people we work with, whether that's artists, collectors, museums, etc. And that's something I try to live by too.
And so as you're coming up on your 5-year anniversary, I also wanted to ask you about being a gallery in New York City. New York is special for so many reasons when it comes to the art world, whether it's the museums or the galleries or the artists. At the same time, I imagine it's also incredibly competitive to operate a gallery in that environment. What are some of the major steps to actually starting a gallery in a place like that, where, for example, so many artists are there but are already represented by other galleries?
Yeah, that's a great point. San Francisco is a little different story. And I think, growing up there and seeing my parents' gallery, they had, I think great taste and even perhaps more opportunities to invite artists to show on the West Coast that hadn't been showing there as broadly. New York is a very competitive environment. I opened a gallery and I think the most densely populated art world environment, knowing that, sure, it's going to be an uphill battle and a challenge to attract certain artists from a younger, more emerging program. I think there have been a few strategies that I've used to move forward and build momentum. One is that a good number of artists that we've shown at the gallery are based in London or elsewhere in Europe, and I think that's been a really helpful tool because it's often the case that especially more emerging artists who come from some of the great programs there, like the Royal College of Art or Slade or Goldsmiths, I think have such immense talent, are being recognized and starting to show at galleries in the UK, but not quite as broadly yet in America. And on trips of mine to London, I always make a point of I cram in as many studio visits as I can. And sometimes I'm only there for 3 or 4 days, but I try to do 9 or 10 or 12 studio visits just back to back to back. And I love doing studio visits. It's one of my favorite parts of the job. And from, a list of, gosh, maybe even over 100 visits I do a year, I try to cull a list of, okay, here are 20 artists that I'm especially excited about. And then maybe from there, I'll say, okay, these 5 artists I think really make sense in a group show together. Let's try out working with them and seeing how that mix may hopefully appeal to our audience. And, I think that's been a really rewarding part. And then in New York, I mean, there are opportunities to work with artists, whether it's directly or I love to work collaboratively too. There have been plenty of instances where we work with bigger galleries, like I'm thinking of Blum or Hauser and Wirth. Even we've worked with certain artists that I've developed a relationship with personally, but that those bigger galleries may represent, and where I've built collegial relationships with friends at those other galleries. They've often put in a good helping word to encourage, a collaborative opportunity for a group show or something like that. We've had, I mentioned Hauser and Wirth. We had a great Mary Heilman in a group show a couple of years ago. We were fortunate enough to get a primary example from her studio. It was a painting from 1989. Blum, I mentioned, we've worked with Tony Lewis on a couple of occasions and worked in a great collaborative way with them. So the list goes on, but yeah, whether it's direct or collaboratively with certain other galleries, it's been a super fun process to think about how group shows can come together, how we can introduce artists where we develop our own relationship, in a longer term basis. And we have 9 artists on our formal artist roster now, which has been an amazing thing to see build.
So you mentioned that you visit the UK often and actually show a lot of artists from there. I travel to London for Frieze each year and maybe one other time a year just to see some shows, but I'm not there as often. But it does feel like the past few years, the scene and the young artists coming out of the UK art schools is maybe the most exciting moment there's been since the YBAs in the 90s. So many are getting attention earlier in their careers, having shows in the UK as well as outside of the UK. What is your perspective on the scene there as someone who's based in the US but visiting with and showing a lot of artists based in the UK?
Yeah, great question, Adam. And I definitely have noticed and appreciated how much talent there is, especially in London and the UK more broadly. I think there's quite a range of what's happening there. My gallery tends to focus on paintings, especially. We've presented certain exhibitions with sculpture. We had our first video show this past summer, but I think at the core of my gallery's vision is paintings. And I think painters in London, especially, have emerged from those grad programs or have been working, even for a couple decades already, but and have maybe shown with great success in the UK and in Europe more broadly, but just haven't really had as much exposure in the US. So just thinking from my roster, to name a few, there's Sholto Blissett is a recent graduate of the Royal College of Art, the RCA. He was someone that I developed a conversation with over several visits to London, visited him in different studios he's now occupied, and I've seen his career and his work grow. So that's been an example of someone who, coming from a great grad program, making impactful work, being shown in presentations by bigger galleries in the UK, But then having this opportunity to really develop a personal relationship with him and add him to our represented list of artists has been a complete joy. But there are also other artists who have been working, over a longer period of time, and even not just in London proper, but I'm thinking of someone like Danny Fox, who lives in Cornwall. He spent 5 years living in Los Angeles and moved back to Cornwall during lockdown. I think he's an interesting example of someone who had been based in the UK, got his start in the UK, did not go to one of the big grad programs, and is instead a self-taught artist, but spent some time in America and had, exposure showing with galleries in the US, in the UK, and has sort of had a foothold in both realms. Then there's someone like Freya Douglas Morris, who we just showed at the Armory last week, and she's been out of grad school for about a decade. Has shown well in the UK, had not shown as broadly in the US. And I had actually first noticed her work in a book. And I sometimes like to say that it's amazing that from reading through about an artist, getting to know them, starting a conversation, visiting with that artist in person, I've in a few cases I've developed lifelong friendships and artist relationships with artists that I've found in books. So it's just this amazing phenomenon that I think can kind of only happen in the art world. But yeah, I think you're totally right. London is certainly having a great moment. The list goes on beyond those three that I mentioned, and it's just been terrific to spend time going back and forth between London and here.
That's pretty incredible that you met Freya and some other artists through books. I mean, I love artist books, but it feels like nowadays artists are typically discovered through social media, through Instagram. It just seems kind of like a dated way, but I love it. It reminds me of, meeting your partner in real life instead of on a dating app. It just doesn't happen as often as it used to.
And I did. I was lucky enough to meet my fiance Lily in real life, and that felt like the anomaly these days.
Definitely. So as we mentioned, the Armory Show was last week in New York, and you presented a solo booth of new paintings by Freya Douglas Morris. It seems like the last few years you've chosen to do solo presentations at the fair. For example, last year, I recall you did a solo booth with one of your other artists, Gabriel Mills. What's behind your strategy to do solo presentations at a fair, the Armory, that's mostly group booths?
I think part of it has to do with how we apply to fairs as a younger gallery, and some of the emerging sections that some of the bigger fairs like the Armory have are really geared towards solo or two artist presentations. But some of it's sort of by necessity of us making our first attempts and applications to the fairs, developing a good rapport and relationship with the fair and its audience. I do think, though, with a fair as large as the Armory, I think it's particularly helpful for a gallery of our size in terms of our reach, in terms of our artist list and roster, to have a solo presentation, because it's such a big fair that I think sometimes it's the solo booths that really stand out, especially of a very, very saturated viewing experience. I think there's sort of a visual breath of fresh air that comes in when you're approaching a booth and, okay, it's one artist. And in the case of Freya Douglas Morris, and I think Gabriel, we had 5 or 6 examples of their work only. So I think it's a bit more focused. I think it shows a decent enough breadth of their work, but at the same time can be quite engaging and a little bit more of a simplified presentation. As a point of comparison, and Adam, I know you're a Texan and from Dallas originally. Another great fair for us has been the Dallas Art Fair. That's been a very different style of fair. There, from our first year there last year and our second year coming back again this year, we did 2 group booths, and those were, to me, great successes as well. Thankfully, where we were able to show a greater breadth of our roster, and I think, when New York is in our backyard and the Armory is a short subway ride away. Dallas is a little bit further, and it's more of an introduction to the audience there, whether it's to the Dallas Museum of Art, which has been a great relationship we've been building, or to local collectors there. I think it's a nice opportunity to not only say, here's one artist, but instead, here are 5 or 6 or 7 artists, and we have plans to, I think, bring about 7 artists back again next year already. And I think gives a little bit more context about, okay, here are some abstract paintings that we show by these few artists, and here are figurative painters that we're especially excited about. Or most recently, we brought a ceramic artist, Stephanie Shee, to the booth and had three examples all sell to local collectors based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I think to us, it's a really fun way to show a mix. And what they say about Texas is true. Everything is bigger in Texas, and the booth size is bigger too. So that definitely helps.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said, especially related to the Armory Show. It's in the Javits Center, such a massive venue. There are so many galleries. Eventually, after you're there for a few hours, all the art starts to blur together. It was refreshing to visit your booth and some of the neighboring galleries in that present section in the corner there that was focused on solo or two-person presentations. And actually, I met Freya, and I had an opportunity to meet several of the other artists who were showing in the section. It didn't have the same feeling as a full-on solo gallery exhibition, but the booths there did feel that way to a degree, and you could sense a level of pride and accomplishment from the artists, similar to how one might feel after finishing a gallery exhibition. So to me, experiencing that area of the fair, meeting and talking with the artists in their booths, that was the most memorable part of the fair.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I would equally agree that I was thrilled to be amidst such great peers and other galleries that I admire. I'm thinking of Mickey Mang, Jack Barrett. Just a few booths away, I had great presentations too. Many more beyond those, but those come to mind especially. And yeah, great to see that we're in a very collaborative, cooperative part of the fair where sort of I hope the rising galleries of my age group or my peer group seem to all be having great success too.
So your gallery is located in New York in the Upper East Side, which has some important galleries there, but most of the more contemporary galleries have been in Chelsea the last several years, and now so many of them seem to be moving to Tribeca or opening up in Tribeca. Why did you choose the Upper East Side 5 years ago as a location for your gallery, and how do you think the neighborhood's doing today?
Yeah, another good question. I live all the way downtown in the financial district, so I really wanted to give myself the best possible challenge of a commute. No, in all seriousness, I really thought carefully about location. And I think Chelsea has been such a hub for so much of the gallery world here in New York for so long now. One consideration I made there was, in thinking of some of the mega galleries like Gagosian and Hauser and Wirth, Pace, Zordner. They have such big presences there, such big physical locations, often more than one gallery, often 4 or 5 floor gallery. That part of my thinking was if a collector comes to Chelsea for the day and they're aiming to hit a few galleries, it could take up a half a day or even a full day just going to 3 or 4 of those that I mentioned, without leaving as much time for some of the younger galleries and smaller spaces. And I think part of my thinking there was, just to be cautious and cognizant of maybe not getting lost in the shuffle. When I started the gallery in 2019, Tribeca certainly had momentum going, but it was not the critical mass yet that it is now. And, I find aspects of Tribeca very tempting and exciting. And, I'm quietly on the look in case anything might appeal either for a second location at some point, or otherwise. And, I think Tribeca really has beautiful spaces. You can walk in and enjoy a broader, more expansive viewing experience. But all that said, I really do believe in the Upper East Side, and it too has had an extraordinary momentum. Even the last year, Sotheby's buying the Breuer building, and plans, I think, within the next year or two to move in and open up. White Cube opened its gallery about a block from mine. For the time being, Gagosian remains at 980 Madison, and just around the corner from me are Aquavella, Manouche, and Almin Resch. And so I think to me, it was a good honor for sure to be in the midst of those other galleries, great museums. The Met's 3 blocks away. I think it's a really classic, old school, but still very relevant location for galleries. And, I appreciate that every day. There have been occasions where I'm walking down Madison Avenue and I run into a collector or an advisor or an interior designer, and that conversation sparks an invitation to come by the gallery and to pull something out of the racks. And I think sales occur from those casual run-ins, which has been a big help.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it definitely has this distinct personality of the neighborhood, which is nice. And as you said, there's a lot of really great established galleries there as neighbors. So yeah, tell us, we're in September right now. The new art season has started. Tell us what you have upcoming at the gallery for the remainder of the year.
Thank you. Yeah, happily. So just last night, we opened our first solo show ever with Ross Taylor. And Ross is a British artist by birth, but based in Australia. And I had mentioned the Dallas Art Fair. Just last year, we had 4 of his paintings at the Dallas Art Fair, which all sold to wonderful collectors, including a few in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And we'd had 2 paintings of his in a group show before that, a big group show called The Natural World. And so it's been great momentum building with his work and getting to know him. This opening last night was thankfully a great success. We had a fun dinner afterward at a Mexican restaurant right around the corner from the gallery, and just a wonderful celebration for Ross's new body of work. They're landscape paintings. The show is called A Knowing History, and the landscape paintings are really thinking carefully about how images are consumed and created, especially in the 21st century, in the digital age. A lot of it comes from life and from his own walks and hikes and camping experiences around Australia. But yeah, some of it's more interpreted from memory and from imagination too. So it's a show that I would love to welcome you to, Adam, if you're in New York in the next month. And then upcoming on our agenda next is our first solo show with Alina Zedi, who is an Indian artist based in London. So back, full circle of the London conversation. She's been an artist we've been extremely excited about. We included her in a group show, I want to say about a year or 2 ago. We had 3 paintings of hers in that exhibition. And this new body of work will be about 10 or so new paintings, including, I think, her largest painting to date. It is a quite enormous quadriptych, so a 4-element, 4-canvas artwork, and I think it's going to be a show to see. So that'll be opening in mid-October. And then last but not least, just after Art Basel Miami, we'll open our last show of the year, which is a group show to be announced. I'll give you a little mini scoop of that. It's just, it's I think 4 or 5 artists at this point, and many new names that we haven't yet shown, but artists that I've been really excited to get to know over the last few years. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it sounds exciting. Well, Alex, thanks so much again for coming onto the podcast. Congratulations on your upcoming 5th anniversary of the gallery. We appreciate you coming on and reflecting on your experiences so far with the gallery, as well as sharing your perspective on really a variety of aspects of the art world. And if our listeners want to follow your gallery more closely, which I highly recommend that they do, what's the best way to stay updated?
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you again. I'm a huge fan of your podcast. It's really an honor to join you today. And thank you for letting me share a little bit more about my 5-year history. And my hope is that we continue to grow. And thanks to your listeners. And if they do want to find us, please feel free to visit us at the gallery in the Upper East Side. We're on Madison between 78th and 79th. Or, check us out online at alexanderberggruen.com or on Instagram at Alexander Berggruen.
Perfect. Thanks again, Alex. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam. Have a great day.